So, this week on the Decarb Connect podcast, we're going to take a look at the EIC, which, for those of you who don't know, is a 10 billion euro fund that was first piloted in 2014 and is now aiming to get to more scale. I'm joined today by Louis Papaemmanuel, who's the managing director of MyEU Consulting. And Louis is going to tell us a little bit about the nature of this fund, but also, I think, dig into some of the criticisms and challenges that have emerged for the fund recently and sort of talk about what they mean for those that might otherwise seek to benefit from the fund. So, Louis, that's a little bit of an introduction. I wonder if you could give a bit more background to you, your background, and how you've arrived at this point of advising in this space, but also just kick us off with a little bit about the EIC.
Thanks. Hi. We are a consultancy focusing on EU grant funding. We are servicing innovative small businesses and are particularly focused on deep tech innovations that are solving substantial scientific or engineering challenges. We support them in fundraising using both equity and non-dilutive EU funding instruments, as well as innovation calls. We specialize in a range of them, of course, but as you mentioned, more particularly on the EIC accelerator, which is aiming to invest over 10 billion euro in the next 7 years to scale European deep tech. So that's what we do. We are based in Brussels. We work with innovation with customers across all of the EU and beyond, with the presence also in Israel and occasionally in other non-EU countries. And we have become fairly specialized in this particular domain. So I think we will obviously talk about that. So what's the EIC and what's its current status? I mean, the EIC, as you mentioned, under Horizon Europe today is in fact the successor of what the SME instrument and then the EIC pilot was under Horizon 2020, which was the framework program of the past 7 years, which ended in December. It is widely regarded as the holy grail of funding instruments for startups. It's probably one of the most, the largest competition globally and offers up to 2.5 million euro per candidate in grant funding, specifically for innovation activities, so R&D development and piloting and so on. And then that is complemented as well by up to 15 million euro in equity provided in partnership with the European Investment Fund and the European Investment Bank in equity to fund scaling up / commercial activities. The objective here is really to fund frontier technologies with significant transformational impact. So we're really talking about technologies that have a massive impact on the industry in which they are designed and developed in. They have often significant benefits for society and for the world. So you will tend to see a lot of companies that are working on extremely complex engineering challenges, and often in scientific laterals of sectors. So you often see biotechnology as a recurrent theme. You have obviously a lot of proposals that are basically targeting, or at least have a significant relevance to the Green Deal and to the sustainability agenda of the EU.
Obviously, this fund is not only aimed at environmental innovations, but you were saying that roughly kind of half of the financing is going to those solutions with an environmental focus. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's not a wrong assumption to have. Of course, I have to be very transparent. I haven't necessarily verified specifically the exact number, nor that I think it would be very, very simple to do. But you have the two greatest categories traditionally within this call, within this competition, is on the one hand healthcare, which is obviously very, very relevant because we are obviously also tackling extremely important issues, and of course the impact is very easily seen. Now we're talking about people who are sick or who are dying. So obviously that's one major category, if not probably the largest category, because this is also an extremely expensive endeavor usually, with the clinical validation of different technologies. But then on the other hand, when it isn't, we tend to have solutions that have at least one or more environmental dimensions. So even if it's not necessarily the key component, I'm going to give you an example. if we are talking, for instance, about a technology that has to do with aquaculture, it may not necessarily have direct implications for the environment. But by adding efficiency to the process, obviously you are minimizing the use of resources, which ultimately have an impact. So even though it wouldn't be categorized as a Green Deal proposal, it obviously has a dimension that has to do with the environment.
The key takeaway already is just about the scale of this fund, really, and kind of re-quoting you that it's the largest competition globally. And I guess inevitably that means there will be elements of it that are amazing and bang on fit for purpose. And there'll also be things that perhaps in the real world, as the fund has gone through its pilot, have been less successful or more challenging to see implemented in the right way. So give us a sense of how is and how has the EIC evolved? We're heading for, I think you mentioned that it was a March 18th launch for this kind of the real next at scale phase, but tell us how it's evolved so far.
Well, basically, I mean, it has been piloted for the last 7 years. When you take the objective, because I think that's probably the most important element here, is what is supposed to be funding. And as the years progressed, you noticed that there was basically a strong transformation of the EIC, which over time, as the competition became more and more fierce between candidates, you would have it would generate better proposals and obviously a lot more sophisticated solutions. There was a time back in 2015, 2016, where you would submit an application and there were not that many candidates. So with a mark of 12.3 out of 15, you will get funded. Today, if you have a 12.16 out of 15, you are extremely far from even considered to be funded. You need to have at least a 14 point something. So obviously there's that. So that has transformed a bit the way that the EIC operates. And of course, as the funding as the funding grew, as the stakeholders became more interested, and obviously this being the crown jewel of the commission, there's a lot of interest around it. So obviously it has become a lot more sophisticated in many aspects. So today, as opposed to back at the time of its inception, where you could fund a lot more different types of startups, today we see really that it has really been focused on really funding what I like to call frontier technology that are characterized, or basically that are very hard to develop, that require very lengthy R&D processes and very large capital investments before succeeding, or at least before being commercialized. The primary risk for these companies, and this is probably the intent, was that the technical risk is fairly high, right? So while the market risk can often be overlooked due to the potential value of the solution, because if it makes it would be obviously disrupting. So often people question that less, but the burden or the risks or the challenges that these companies faced to fundraise, basically in fundraising efforts, is disproportionately high than other, I would say, more easy to develop solutions. And due to the risk involved and the capital required, obviously, especially because if you consider the investment of VC capital in Europe compared to other regions of the world, these companies are often, for the strategic significance they have basically decided to be supported by the commission. So that's basically the starting point. That's where it is today. Now, as it has evolved, and like I said before, it's a very highly coveted instrument or competition. Obviously, there are things that have proven to be, ill-adapted for how it has evolved. So I mean, I give you a bit. First of all, it's an extremely highly competitive competition. I mean, the number of applicants today, and probably that's the first inefficiency of the system, the number of applicants has continuously increased at every cutoff. So as a consequence, during the course of the program, there's been a continuous drop in success rates. And I've seen that we've gone, for instance, in October 19 to a 4% success rate, which is already fairly low, to a less than 1% in October 2020. That's just in 1 year. Because I mean, there were 4,200 applicants in October for maybe 30 companies that were funded. So of course, these inefficiencies, I mean, you know, in the configuration, the 2018-2020 configuration of the EIC, you know, it's not uncommon to hear that, you know, the EIC has kind of fallen victim to its own success, and that the procedures that were basically devised earlier to be able to manage this instrument have obviously become outdated and irrelevant. One example is obviously that, I mean, since we're talking about oversubscription, so the fact that there are too many applicants for the not only for the funding available, but also for the evaluation architecture of that instrument. The requirement is to evaluate all of these applications in less than 4 weeks. So that's like extremely difficult to do, spurred doubts over the quality of the process, and often led to many saying that this is a lottery. I wouldn't say it is, because a good proposal is a good proposal. But of course, we've seen proposals that have fluctuated drastically in their score from one submission to the other, even though there hasn't been any change in the proposal. And that's not necessarily illogical. It's something that obviously is natural. It's other evaluators who evaluate it, so it's natural that others have a different perception. But there's been a lot of fluctuation, and there's obviously a doubt about the ability of the Commission under this framework to really pick the best ones.
Let's talk just a little bit about that pilot phase, which I mean, I find it fascinating. That was as long as it was, and I'm interested in why. Why do you think that pilot phase has lasted so long? Was that needed? And then let's have a look at then what changes are coming as a result of that period of time in that kind of test and launch phase.
Well, I mean, to start with, the pilot term is confusing and misleading, because I mean, you know, I don't think that, you know, 7 years is actually what you call a pilot. So as long as you accept that, I mean, in this case, if you accept that there will be as many transformation as needed within those 7 years, which is why you maintain the keyword pilot, fine. And this is basically in practice what has happened now, because in the beginning, when it was called the SME instrument, there was no equity. And so at the time, Bernd Reichhardt, who was basically the first director of the EIC, of the SME instrument, there was no conversation at all about equity-based investment and so on. All of this came much later. That's you know, in this case, it's natural to see that there is an evolution, and therefore it's fine. But to be quite fair with you, to be quite honest, we reach now Horizon Europe, and in Horizon Europe, we are actually still changing everything. So we are again piloting new concepts of governance and new concepts of evaluation and new concepts of selection processes, and even of investment guidelines. So, you know, I think that we should maybe accept that this will be an evolving exercise. So an evolving program that will be, and perhaps maybe rightly so, that will need to be flexible and remain very flexible to adapt to the realities of today. But you know, the whole concept of the piloting is something that needs to be taken like we say, with a pinch of salt, because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't really think that it was really strategically considered as a pilot, versus now, you know, even though it has obviously received three times more funding, I don't think that, I think we will continue to have change over the course of the next 7 years.
So then what next? What are you seeing emerge in the kind of the way that either the structure of the fund or how the fund tackles the applicants and that process? What is changing? What's important for both, I suppose, those that might be applying for funds, you know, what's important for them to understand it, and what's also important for us as, well, you now as European taxpayers to understand about this fund as it matures?
So that's a good question. There's two things that we need to, I mean, I think that there are two debates, two discussions here. There is one, what are the new rules for the candidates? So what to expect? So the Commission indeed has transformed, you know, a lot of the process, which is something that obviously is not yet public because the program has not been publicized yet. It will be published in March 18th because the EIC is actually doing their launch event. So we invite you, obviously, whoever's interested, to hear more firsthand. Obviously, the event that they do online will present how the new rules work. We have been fortunate enough to have seen the rules already starting this summer, and we have been together with my colleagues from the European Association of Innovation Consultants, managed to get into a process of providing feedback and taking positions on these to try to protect and defend the interest of our customers as much as possible. So for that, I mean, there are some procedural changes which I'm not going to go into because I don't think that it's necessarily very. I mean, it's going to be fairly simple to understand. But then there's a second element, which is also the non-written rules of the EIC, because it's true that we have seen some conflict and some reversal opposition. Some call it even a doctrine internally about what was the instrument supposed to do, and in practice what it's doing today. So we've seen indeed, because I mean, if this instrument was there to fund those companies that had difficulty in securing funding through VCs, or that didn't have necessarily the I would say the deposit, or at least acceptable term sheets, we have and in this case the Commission would step in as a benevolent investor to actually make sure that they get supported, even if they couldn't crowd in funding from outside investors. We have actually seen in practice that the VC community has been extremely successful at I would say influencing the position of the European Commission, and today has somehow managed to make the VC community, unexpendable, if you want, in the process. So today, even though candidates have had to go through considerable lengths to demonstrate that they were not in a position to raise funding, suddenly the terms that they have seen from the Commission were very different than the stated investment guidelines, because now they basically tell them that they will not see a penny from the Commission unless they can match that with private equity. So, that's one thing. Of course, this change of process is something that also has created a lot of delays, because I think that today we have a lot of companies, and I mean, as much as we support the Commission in rolling out the EIC, we've also seen that they have delayed the providing the terms. To give you an example, there are many companies from October that have been waiting since October 19. So we're talking about more than a year ago, and who are still in the process of signing the terms today. So in the fast-paced movement, world of equity and startups, a year and a half to close a round is very complex and very long, and there have been quite some reports suggesting that some of them actually we had to scale down, or were even on the verge of bankruptcy. So that's something we need to be attentive to. Again, we should not necessarily always. We should keep this in mind. Of course, the EIC is a very important program, and I'm sure that over time, with the appropriate communication mechanism and feedback mechanisms, hopefully all stakeholders will be able to actually contribute to actually establishing the EIC as something that will continue to be as successful as it is.
Okay, so the main criticisms then, or the main challenges, are really around this issue of the kind of speed of response, so the time it's taking, which, as you rightly point out, if it's a year and a half, I mean, that's like 8 years in a life of a of a small scale business, isn't it? So that the time it's taking to secure and finalize funds, the shift in who is influencing how that overall fund operates, and those are the the main kind of points of concern at the moment? I'm just asking because the next question is really going to be what do applicants need to know about this, and how can they prepare for the best outcome? So I think that kind of just ensuring that I've understood those are the two main points, or was there another one that is something that candidates also applicants, sorry, need to know?
Yes, I think applicants need to be, first of all, applicants need to be prepared. I mean, this is not this. If we are talking about raising, what could be upwards of 10 million euro, with or without the grant component within that amount, they need to be aware that we are talking about a significant effort that requires you to be, fully aware of your of whether or not you fit the profile, first of all, because I think a major issue where we ended up with 4,500 applicants in October is also because, beyond the fact that they could endlessly resubmit the proposal, no one ever told them that they basically are not they don't fit with what the commission intends to fund to begin with. And I think that's something that obviously now will be corrected, because they will institute a first step where there is a filtering mechanism where, it's a short application that kind of gives you very quickly whether or not this is for you or not. I mean, we are from a procedural perspective, you know, in the old rules, at least in the old procedures, you should have expected that, a proposal to be funded would require on average anywhere between 150 and 250 productive hours. So it's not something that is light. The profile of the candidate is fairly standard, in my opinion. We're talking about a company that obviously has is working in deep tech. This is not a preparation that is dissimilar to any round, right? So I mean, think about it as an investor memo. If you have a project that fits, if you're at the right time, if you have the validation points that are required to be an eligible candidate. You also have to consider, and usually companies that have raised already 3 or 4 million euro have already that mindset. They already have a team of competent people. VCs, when they are VC backed, have already confronted them to hard questions that they've had to think about and resolve. So we're talking about a technology and a business plan that is mature, at least more mature than it would have been in earlier stages, and where there is a confidence both in execution of and reaching the market, but also in the skill and the talent that you have in house. Of course, we the requirement of non-bankability and so on has again to be taken with a pinch of salt, because this, even though it was stated that these companies when they were, because there's confusion when you have raised 5 million euro, but you're dealing with a clinical validation milestone in a few years, obviously that's not going to take you anywhere. So we have to also keep in mind that it's not because you've raised 10 15 million euro that you become ineligible, especially since now you will probably be fast tracked, since the EIC prefers to fund those who can actually crowd in private investments at the same time. So that's I think the takeaway from this. Even though it's tempting to think that you should get out of your way to get the EIC. The EIC is something that is an extremely high risk endeavor, and it should never be the first priority or the objective one of your company. It's something that is on the side. Of course, if you decide to jump on board, you have to be committed to work hard together with your consultant, because the consultant is not there to invent everything. And ultimately, I think what matters is that you keep an open mind that this is a high risk adventure, that you need to set yourself the target to win and work towards that goal, but that ultimately you shouldn't necessarily get completely out of your own way, because if you don't fit with it, there's little you can do about it.
Let's take a step back from the EIC. And rather than looking at that specifically, I'm interested in your thoughts. That the EIC is trying to answer fundamental questions, right? As you said, the intent is to help to fund those technologies that ultimately could have a very big impact, but have a long road to kind of prove what they're capable of. But if you're looking at innovations in the innovation landscape, what is it that you think is needed to support the scale up of good innovation so that they get to that commercial scale? Obviously, EIC is trying to approach this from one angle, and as you say, it's a a big bet on whether you would get accepted and move through. So what do we need to be doing in addition to make sure that good innovations can scale?
We should keep in mind that Europe is very good at innovating. Like Europe is leading in terms of scientific publications or patents and so on. The only problem is that until quite recently, there was a discrepancy between that and their ability to reach the market. I think this has transformed totally in the past years in Europe. The European landscape in Europe, I'm very optimistic about it, because in a matter of as little as 5 years, it has completely changed. Right? There's no one today that doesn't have someone very close to them that hasn't founded or working in a startup to begin with. So I think that, that's the first thing. I think that the VCL, I mean, the support structure, both at the local, at the regional, at the national, and at the European level, have multiplied and will continue to be reinforced with experience, with more capital injections, and so on. So there is a big support system, and I think that ecosystems are actually being well created, maybe not as sophisticated and advanced as they can be in other regions, but there's certainly a lot of hubs where innovation, and the interaction of different I would say stakeholder groups, both from the funding world, but also from the scientific world, et cetera, are multiplying and are growing. So I'm very optimistic. Now, the conversation about the European unicorns and so on, I have to admit, I don't want to get in that, because I don't necessarily understand the concept of chasing the unicorns. But I believe that, right now, all the trends point towards year by year a significant strengthening of that ecosystem, and I'm very optimistic that actually very rapidly there will be no conversation anymore about what Europe needs to do to become better at this.
Okay, great. Well, look, Louis, thank you so much for talking to us. I know we've sort of focused obviously on some of the challenges and deficiencies of the EC, but let's come back to the point that you made at the beginning, that it is still the holy grail of funding instruments. It's a massive competition, a massive opportunity for the right companies with the right support.
We have to support, I think, the Commission and its remarkable effort to do this. The Commission has stepped way outside of its comfort zone, so it's natural to see that there's a lot of conflicts, and that they may not be necessarily the processes and the structures from a transparency, but also from a procedure, from a decision making point of view yet. So we have to also bear that in mind. I applaud the initiative. I think it's very very bold to see that the Commission can assume that role and do it with conviction. So that's the first thing. And of course, for any questions, I invite anyone to just reach out. I'll be happy to provide more information.
Great. We'll make sure we share some links. So for those of you who access our podcast through our website and through Spotify, you'll see a bit more about some of the link information in there too. But again, Louis, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Alex.